So, hello everybody. Welcome to Wednesday. It's a pretty great Wednesday. It's above freezing. Woo! Yay. So today I wanted to check in with you. Maybe that's a little too loud. Hello, how are we now? We're better, less loud. Okay, well, I wanted to check in with you about kind of what's going on in our sort of course flow, and then we are doing a Photoshop demo today. So I can go ahead and fold this out. So I think for today, I will also provide demo files, just because it's really easy for me to do. And so if you have any sort of like desire to use the demo files to kind of practice some of the techniques that we're working on, that's something that you can do. It's absolutely not required. So today we're really sort of like gearing the demo towards tools that you can use on photographs, not so much in the collage assignment. We're sort of inviting everything in, right? Like any digital image. And for this assignment, we're really focusing specifically on photographs. And for many of you, the images that you might find might actually be not made from digital photographs, if they're old enough. And so the demo that I'm using today is going to combine a digital photograph that I made just a few weeks ago with an image from the 1960s. So you can kind of see how that works. So that's kind of what we're working on today. Next week, we're getting into making animated GIFs. And then next Monday, the 27th, I will be posting a video for you all online. I'll go ahead and give you a fresh one, probably from my home office, because I'll be traveling. I have a conference in DC. And then after, as we do that, we'll be getting into video. So does anyone, before I kind of jump into Photoshop, well, actually I'll jump into the browser first, but does anybody have any questions or kind of concerns about the course flow? Cool. All right. Well, so fantastic. So what I would like to do, I'll show you the kind of end point that I arrived at this morning. This is an image from the Apollo 11 training mission. So that's why you can see it looks like it's on a soundstage in California. That was actually when they were kind of doing training simulations. And just my cat. That's right, that's my boy. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to take this image, which kind of comes from a contemporary, very contemporary kind of, it's basically I shot it on my phone. And we're going to talk about how to integrate it with this more sort of like degraded, less than perfect historical image. So today we're going to be talking a lot about image adjustment. We're going to be talking about how to kind of doctor up images that have flaws. This is actually I do this demo every year. This is the first time I've done this demo with these photographs. So if you happen to want more on this technique, you might be interested in finding the demos on my YouTube channel. I use a different Polaroid image, and I use a picture of Lil Bub from the internet. So it just might be slightly different ways of doing things or slightly different techniques. So just to let you know that that is out there. But today, I kind of wanted to keep things fresh. So basically, there are a bunch of historical image databases that are on the, right here, on the course website. I'm going to be adding this website, which is thoroughly excellent, the NASA sort of public image search. And one of the really great things about using the public image search is that they have pretty high resolution images. So that's nice. So I'll put a link to that in there later today. This I pulled up. I use Google Photos to organize most of my photos. And you can see here, one of the things when you're trying to do this whole like putting something from one environment and taking it to another environment, one of the things that you can do to probably make it turn out really well is if you actually photograph it yourself, or if you have enough photographs to look through, that you can find a picture that has similar lighting, maybe similar posing, et cetera, et cetera. It just makes your job in Photoshop like 90% easier. So I'm just not afraid to admit that I have literally thousands of pictures of my cat. So if I search on Google Photos for my cat's name, I can find like pretty much a picture of him doing like literally anything. So he's a great model, and that's one of the reasons I use him, is just because I have like literally a photo of him like in every possible situation. He's also, you can see here, he's a great studio assistant. This is doing some work in my studio. So basically, I kind of like scrubbed through those photos, and what I was looking for was, if I show you the original photo, which is here, I kind of chose this original photo for a couple of reasons. One, it had an image area where I felt like it could probably stand having some stuff added to it, right? It's also an area that doesn't have like a whole lot of visual distraction. So if you can find images that actually have blank areas like pavement or walls or, you know, something like that, that also will make your job a lot easier. So this has some, you know, detail in here and some things that we're going to have to figure out and work around, but for the most part, this is going to be pretty easy to slot something into. So we only have 50 minutes, so I want it to be not too challenging. The other thing that you have to think about, like in the case of the cat, like this surface, this sandy surface is receding back in space, right? So anything that sits on that sandy surface, it needs to look like it's receding back in space and probably sitting on a semi-flat surface, right? So I just happen to have this photo in my archive of this is my cat on the dining room table. It's very naughty. But this is like an ideal picture because the angle of the camera is very similar to the sort of sandy area. Also, I've got a sort of like mid-tone flat thing, so that just makes it also easier. And there are some things about this that could be potentially challenging. I mean, I would say in general, fluffy cats are hard to work with because they're fluffy, and that hair boundary can be a little tricky. So we'll talk a little bit about ways that we can kind of extract the cat from its background without kind of making it look not fluffy. That would be a crime against cats. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the cat image in Photoshop. There's not really a whole lot that we need to do right now to the original Apollo image. Oops, wrong window. So I'm going to open this with Photoshop. Now, I'm going to show you something that I hope it won't make you too mad at me. I showed you basically like the hard way to do selections, which is to use the magic wand tool, do select and quick mask, and all the techniques that we've looked at so far. But I'm feeling the sci-fi today. There is another way. So there is. I am going to show you today how to use select and mask. So select and mask is like a little sort of self-contained tool in Photoshop where it can allow you to use some AI tools to basically detect what you want. And so these tools, the reason that I'm showing you these second instead of showing you them first is because I don't think that these tools like really help facilitate your understanding of how selection works in Photoshop. These tools are sort of like a shortcut method to make complicated selections a little bit easier. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit this select subject button. Like, just go home. No, it's probably not perfect, but yeah, this particular tool in Photoshop has gotten much, much better in the last couple of years. And what it's really good at doing, one of the things that it's really good at doing is preserving hair. So you can also click this button that says Refine Hair. And then it basically just kind of got a little bit deeper in there and sort of refined some of those contours. So there's a little bit of ookiness that I would consider maybe like working on. I'm not 100% crazy about what it's done here on this kind of bottom shadow area. But I think that that's the kind of stuff where I would just maybe click OK to this tool. And what this is going to do is it's going to just generate a layer with a layer mask. So we can also just come in later and kind of clean some of this stuff up manually if we need to. Now, you might be asking me, well, this is clearly why the algorithms don't understand why this cat has fur coming out of its toes. So we'll fix that. So it just brings you a layer with a layer mask. So I can come in and kind of like erase this layer mask, just like I would with a normal layer mask. Or I might just leave it entirely and just wait until it's superimposed over the other image, because I don't actually know what this kind of gray tablecloth is going to look like against the gray sand. And I might just be able to like really quickly blend it rather than spend like an hour working on the hair on my cat's toes. That, you know, is maybe just not the best use of my time. So I'm going to save this, this little mistake for when we work on the big image. The same with these black shadows. I think these black shadows could definitely get thinned out quite a bit. That's the kind of thing where I would rather, instead of doing it in a version that's kind of isolated, I would rather do it with a big fuzzy brush once I get it into the context that I'm going to put it into. So that being said, you might ask yourself real quickly, Meg, again, why did we not see select and mask like when we were having to do that, all those background removals? And I guess my answer is basically like, because it uses AI algorithms, a good amount of the time it doesn't work. Or it looks really weird, or you get a result that you're not expecting. So I just sort of feel like the sort of like foundational way to like actually know that you're doing it right is to do it yourself. It's a good motto for life. So I'm going to slide it over into this image, and now I have this this monster floof here. And definitely, I'm going to have to do some just really direct things right off the bat. One of the things I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to scale it down. So I can access my show transform controls and probably just do that right away. I'm sort of just doing this by eye. I think Norbert's head is about like this, that big. So he still looks pretty big. Maybe somewhere around there. Let me slide my palettes around just a tiny bit to kind of optimize our situation here. Great. So, okay, so I have kind of a laundry list of things that I want to do, and I'm going to go through them in a certain order. So if I don't get to all of them, I will leave the not as important stuff for last. So the first thing that you may notice that I did in this sort of completed mock-up is that I went ahead and I actually flipped him over. And I think the reason for that is mostly because this guy right here is like the most active, the most like, oh, check out this nice cat. And so I kind of felt like maybe the cat would be like gesturing towards him rather than trying to like, you know, hang out with this guy. Also, just visually, you can see that the light hitting the cat is really like kind of darkening the face here, and that this is the area of shadow in the image. So making those two things line up is just going to make the image look slightly more plausible. So how to flip him over? Well, there are these transform controls that are enabled right now, but there's also a function in the edit menu called transform. And this is where you can take the transformation box and you can distort it. You can, you know, just do this long list of things. It's really awesome. In this case, I think we want to flip horizontal. Boop. Done. And so that's pretty fantastic. That's done. And I guess maybe the next thing that we want to think about doing is this like little tripod on the ground is obviously like what this guy is gesturing towards, I think. And sometimes, you know, when you're doing these types of images, you might need to like erase details. Also, if you're using a historical image, which you may be using for this project, you might have like really significant scratches that are like through people's face or something like that, and you want to fix them. So I'm going to show you a couple of tools where we really fix this image. This image is not as bad as the image that I usually use, so there's less to fix. So if you're really interested in those like photo healing, photo fixing tools, I would definitely check the sort of earlier YouTube video for that. But right now I'm just going to use the healing brush tool. So there's a whole suite of tools here that are basically meant for repairing photographs. And probably my favorite is the healing brush tool. So the healing brush tool is also kind of AI driven, and you basically just option click to define a source point. So in this case, I'm going to run the brush all the way up this thing and see what happens. So if I identify a source point, like over here, by option clicking, sorry, I'm kind of like a little, there we go, option click right there. Now, it looks like nothing's happening, but wait. Let me check real quickly on something. Oh, that would explain it. Oh, I am. Good observation. Thank you. Yeah, so obviously here I was on the sort of transparent layer, so yeah, we definitely want to be working on the background layer. That's in my pantheon of like top 5 Photoshop mistakes, constantly on the wrong layer. So yeah, I'm just going to hit Option, and I'm just going to scrub this thing all the way up. You can see it looks a little weird as it gets to the top. So one of my methods for dealing with that is to basically deal with it in sections. So here, I can option click here and kind of work my way down. And then here, I can option click here and just kind of work my way up through this small part. Because it's basically using that area that you sample from to kind of fill the pixels that you're indicating need to be replaced. So if we were to put our source option here, we could, theoretically like paint the cat over here. Now the algorithms are going to want to fight this because the algorithms want sort of something that's somewhat the same color, but it's still going to give you, in any case, a result that you don't want. Yeah, so that's basically the healing brush tool, and I think these sort of long, thin things where you have to run something over or run a brush for a distance, that's what the healing brush tool is really great for. Now, there's some other tools that I want to show you, but quickly, I'm just going to use the healing brush tool right here really quickly. I think the healing brush tool, personally, is really awesome. And it can do really a lot. But there are other things where you might run into problems. This is starting to get really hairy through here. And you can see how if you have an object like this sort of strut, where it has some sort of like empty space around it, that can make these tools like work really well. That's what they want. So if you have a ton of crap happening in the background, it makes it a little bit harder to deal with. So this is probably not going to be able to be fixed through the healing brush tool. I'm going to have to probably think about some other method. So I can use the healing brush tool right here, and I'm actually going to come out here to bump up against another color. And then also, of course, there's this sort of like, this is a government-produced photograph, so there's the whole, good enough for government work sort of adage might apply here. But I do want to, kind of get through some of these tools to demonstrate them to you. So I want to show you how to use the patch tool quickly. So the patch tool is like my other sort of like mainstay in terms of photo fixing tools. In the patch tool, you basically draw a shape around something that you want to replace. So in this case, I want to get rid of some of this rusty colored stuff, which clearly does not exist on the moon. And then I just take that selection, drag it to an area that vaguely resembles what I want, and let it go, and it kind of whoosh, just tones down that area. So the patch tool is, like, for my money, probably one of the best tools that we have available for fixing photos. This little area I really would like to fix. I think it's going to be a little bit challenging. One of the reasons I want to fix it, I might actually kind of not prioritize this because it's kind of contained with its boot, but I'll get to it in a second. This seems super important to me because it's intersecting with my subject, right? So it just has a lot of visual importance. So I'm going to deselect, and I could certainly use the patch tool here. The only problem is, if I haven't mentioned this, I have a really mean case of carpal tunnel. Drawing with the mouse is not super awesome right now. I made it work. So now I'm just going to drag this up here, and you want it to definitely line up because you have these like lines, right? That are if they don't line up, that'll be super obvious. And yeah, it seemed like the patch tool did sort of like do a thing there in a really good way. For this is going to be really tricky. This is probably a situation where I would maybe say that like maybe this entire pole should be there because it's attached to this thing. Like we have to go through, up the chain to see like where this thing actually ends. The part that's actually bothering me is this little black thing here that it's sort of like just, I don't know, can't stop looking at it. Also, I want to show you guys how to do this thing. So I'm going to do this the quote-unquote hard way, and that is that I'm going to get a polygonal lasso tool, and I'm going to find an area of the image that I can basically steal some pixels from. Hello, chunk of pixels. And I'm going to do our very favorite thing. I'm going to cut and paste. And then I'm going to rotate this. And get it to sort of line up. Dun, dun. And I'm going to zoom way in. And so basically what I'm doing is I'm kind of doing the patch tool, but I'm doing it manually. So you may be saying, Meg, that seems to have quite an outline on it. Yeah, we're not done. I am going to now use the eraser tool and kind of come through here and just blend it in. So this is actually one of the situations where instead of using a hard brush like you would use for a selection, for something like this, I would use a big fuzzy brush because we're really trying to kind of just create like a seamless sort of blend. And we might not get all the way there. So we can see if we maybe have this like in the realm of the slightly better. Not this one. Right. So from a distance, that would probably look fine. So that is totally a thing that you can do. Like, you can just grab a selection of pixels and just slap it on top of something and blend it in, and you're basically like doing Photoshop's job for you. But the good part about that is that you're getting exactly what you want, and you have like 100% control of that process. So sometimes that's a really useful technique. I mean, when I used to have that actual professional job where I would like remove, a lot of these features in architecture, that was pretty much the way to do it. You just take a chunk of the wall and then move it over to the other chunk and feather it out. Okay, so I feel like from like looking at this at like a reasonable viewing distance, I feel like the problem is solved. So the next thing I want to think about working on is this cat situation. So this cat has a couple of characteristics when we look at the image. One, this cat kind of came with some of its own shadows, but it doesn't really have any shadows falling on it. And you can see that everything else in the image has this really intense, really long shadow, right? So probably one of the first things that we want to do to kind of make this a little bit more plausible is to make a shadow. So I'm going to show you how I would make a shadow. There are lots of different ways to make a shadow in Photoshop. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take this layer and I'm going to duplicate it. Duplicate. And so there's my duplicated layer. This is one of those situations where it might be advantageous to me to actually apply the layer mask, because this is a shadow, I probably will not be significantly changing the shape of the selection, and it just will make things a little more straightforward. So I'm going to do what's called rasterizing a layer, which is basically like a way to hang on. So right now I'm not seeing it in the list of options, and I'm just going to kind of look over some things real quickly. It should be right there, and we should be able to click on it. So it probably means that there's something about my configuration that's not quite right. So I'm going to look into that. So probably the first thing that I'm going to try is I'm going to try just applying the layer mask. So that should be what rasterizing would actually do. So I'm going to basically like apply the layer mask, and then I'm going to rasterize it. So if you go to layer mask apply, that basically does the same thing effectively as rasterizing. And so now you can see that rasterizing is not an option because we basically just effectively rasterized it. So rasterizing is something that you would do on layers that have like special Photoshop magic, like text or I don't know, like vector shapes or some of the more advanced Photoshop layers. If you want to kind of apply them and make them pixels, that's what rasterizing is for. So we've basically done the same thing through a slightly different method. So you can see that I have this cat layer sort of all by itself. Probably the easiest way to just like make to go ahead and make a shadow is, so I just am thinking about doing things in a slightly different order. So, sorry, wait a second. We're going to go back to before we applied the layer mask. So it's still the duplicated layer with the layer mask. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to find the color black, and I'm going to put that in my brush. And I want to do this while the layer mask is still there so that I can use the layer mask as a tool to kind of only apply the black color to that. And so actually I want white because I want to, nope, not that. And I also want to work on not the layer mask. Yep, right, okay, so let me get my black and get it set up right. Okay, so basically what I'm doing is I'm just filling the layer in with black, okay? So you can do that or not do it. I mean, sometimes I do it with just the photograph like darkened down. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and fill it with black because that seems like the easiest way to do it. And so now, I guess I will go ahead and apply that layer mask. It's a little annoying that you have to do that right now. Okay, so now I have this layer that I can really play with. And if I bring back my other layers, it's going to look a little crazy because it's on top of my other layer right now. But one of the reasons for that is because I really would like to be able to see it. So if I take the opacity down to 42 and maybe just start by moving this layer in another place, okay, so now you can probably see how that might start to look like a shadow, but we're totally not even close to done. What we probably want to do next, I'm going to go ahead and line it up again. What I like to do is to go in here to the transform menu and distort. And you can see that these shadows are like pretty long, right? Look at the shadows coming off that guy's feet. So I'm just going to kind of play with this until I get something that I'm fairly happy with, that looks kind of right. I'm not super concerned about the tonal qualities of this yet, because we're going to think about another way to kind of get it to look a little more natural. So for now, I'm just going to click to accept that transformation. And this top layer, I think I'm going to use the multiply mode, which is my personal favorite mode for shadow blending. And then I want to knock it back probably quite a bit to like 15, 20%. And that, pretty much, in a nutshell, is how you make shadows in Photoshop. Turn it black, warp it. Yeah?
How did you add that color to black?
I just used a brush, so I can show you again. So I just, I had a layer kind of all by itself, right? So I had a blank layer, and I just used the brush tool and a black color selection in this case, and I drew inside the layer mask. So I just really quickly you could also use the fill tool if you wanted to kind of just fill the entire layer mask. Okay, so that's a thing we can do, and I'm going to bring my layers back. I feel sort of like satisfied with that shadow as far as like, the time that we have allowed for today. I definitely am the type of person that when I'm left in my normal environment, I will mess around with things kind of forever. But there's a couple of other problems that we really need to address here. One is that this cat is like terrifyingly sharp in comparison to the rest of the photograph, right? I mean, you can see how this photograph is just not very sharp. And that's a characteristic of older photographs because the technology was not as good. So that's all right. So how can we get this less sharp? Well, one of the main ways that you would consider doing that is probably to come up here to Filter and then go to Gaussian Blur. I'm on the wrong layer right now, so I'm going to just make sure I have the correct layer selected. Also, one thing that I find really helpful when I have a bunch of layers is if you label your layers, it really helps. Because then it just keeps you from kind of clicking on like, oh, what's layer 1 copy again? What's layer 2 copy? So now it's just like top Norbert and shadow. So let's go ahead and check out that Gaussian blur. There are, as you can see, there are like 500 ways to blur something in Photoshop. Gaussian blur is probably one of my favorites. It's one of the more simple methods, and it just produces a nice sort of overall blur. So I think if we look at that, can you see that on the projector? Yeah, definitely. So this is a 1 pixel blur, which probably is going to be the range that you're in, the 1 to 2 pixel blur range, unless your image is absurdly high resolution, in which case maybe you're using a lot more. But if you're just looking to kind of like fuzz it up a tiny bit, which is what we're looking for, that helps. Okay, so we got our fuzz. What else? Well, so there's also this sort of idea of like color and image adjustment. So if you look at the image of the astronauts, there's a couple of things that we can say about it. It's a fairly high contrast image, meaning that it has really bright lighting and it has pretty dark shadows, right? If you look at this image that I shot of my cat, right here, and we look at it kind of in context, it's a much more kind of diffuse lighting, right? Like, it's like everyday lighting, like we would have. It's not on a soundstage in Hollywood. Neither is this, by the way. Yeah, so probably I would say, in terms of like putting these things in the same kind of plausible universe, one of the things that we probably want to do is we want to do some image adjustments to the cat. So you can do image adjustments in Photoshop in two ways. You can do image adjustments that apply to the layer that you're on, and they are permanent. And then you can also make an image adjustment layer that applies to all the layers that are underneath it, and it works like a layer mask where you can selectively edit it and do all kinds of cool things with it. So I'm going to show you both methods today. And this is definitely like in the realm of the important. So let's go ahead and grab that cat, and then if I go over here to image, probably my first bet for image adjustment is levels. Some people might say brightness and contrast, which is sort of just a more user-friendly way of adjusting the levels. So they really do effectively the same thing. It just is a different interface, and one interface might be slightly easier. So I'll show you brightness and contrast first. That is just these two sliders where you can amp up the brightness and amp up the contrast. So you can pretend that you're using Instagram or whatever. Like, it's exactly the same. And that's great. I mean, sometimes you can get something that you need to get done with those tools. I try to use the the levels palette, because the levels palette gives you a lot more information. So what's happening right now is this histogram corresponds to the layer that we're on, and it's giving us some feedback. So this is literally like a linear graph of the pixels in your image. So this would be 0, as in the least bright pixels, and this would be 255, which is the top end, the brightest, whitest pixels. And then this slider is called the gamma slider. So my advice to you, if you're new to image adjustment, is to start with the white and with the dark. And usually what I do is I take the white slider and I move it down to the point where you start to see this hill form. Sometimes you'll see histograms, and you could spend like an entire lifetime just studying image histograms. But sometimes you'll see histograms where there's nothing in the graph for a certain span of time, usually on the white or on the dark end. And so what you would want to do, one of my sort of like immediate fixes, is to take the two sliders on the ends and put them to the actual ends of where the histogram starts and ends. So if there's space here, basically just move it to where there's not space. And those are sort of adjustments that are going to make your image look a little more normal, whatever that means. And those are also adjustments that are not likely to hurt your image. What do I mean by hurting your image? Well, if you take the white point and you set it all the way down here, you can see we have a very drastic adjustment. But what's also happening there, and this is really important for you to know, this is why adjustment layers are so cool, by the way. What's happening is that all of these pixels from this point on are going to get deleted when you apply this adjustment, right? So you're basically like throwing away data. So now, is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? I don't know. It's your Photoshop. But it's something to think about, certainly, like if you've put a lot of energy into an image and you want to kind of preserve it. So for that reason, I usually only do levels adjustments like to individual layers if I'm kind of pretty confident that it's a small adjustment and that it's not going to really like have drastic changes. If I'm making drastic changes, I would probably opt for using an image adjustment layer, which we'll look at shortly. So for actually adjusting this image, though, I think I'm going to move the white slider down a little bit. The dark slider is probably in a good spot because I have a lot of dark black in the cat's shadows. So you can see the cat, is definitely a smoky cat. And yeah, I mean, So that definitely brightened up the highlights quite a bit. And I guess that was one of the things that I wanted to see, was to have a little bit of highlight here so that it would sort of, look like it's also being lit, right, by those, by the same sort of light source. So I'll go ahead and apply that. And now, if I wanted to make a couple more adjustments, another thing, I think that actually Norbert, the cat, is doing pretty well as far as color goes. Like, I don't look at this and I'm not just like instantly being like, it's a completely different color. But if I wanted to add some color adjustment, I can find that in the same kind of adjustments flyout that the levels are under. And for color balance, I think the color balance tool is just fine. So what can I say about the color of the original image? Well, you may think that white is white, but it's not. This white is definitely quite warm. It's quite warm. It's a little bit to the yellow and a little bit to the red. So probably I'll just make some of those adjustments to reflect that on the cat layer. So this is kind of in the realm of the somewhat subtle. But you can see I'm just kind of shifting him to the warm a little bit. And that, again, will sort of help sort of like make them be in the same universe. The other thing that I wanted to show you for sure today, and we just have a few minutes left, so that's great, is maybe like a slightly different approach. What if instead of trying to get Norbert to match the color of these, what if I took the entire image and just colorized it or made it a different color? That sounds easy. So yeah, that's an option that you could totally take. So in order to do that, I'm gonna make an adjustment layer. So as I was talking about before, like adjustment layers are a way of applying all of these adjustments that are also here in the image adjustment palette. But when you use an adjustment layer, it works like a layer mask and it applies to all the layers underneath. So I'm gonna go ahead and make a black and white adjustment layer. And a couple of things are going to happen. First of all, my entire image went black and white, which is what I was expecting. I'm also going to make sure that this adjustment layer is on top of my shadow layer because I want it to also, apply there. Each of these adjustment layer modes will pop up a window in properties where you can basically adjust how things get seen by whatever adjustment or conversion you're applying. So you can twizzle the knobs if you like. And I mean, the other cool thing about adjustment layers is that they can be selectively applied. So right now, I am actually on the layer mask. Oh, let me get a bigger brush. That's so not satisfying. So yeah, you can bring it back selectively and selectively apply it, which is awesome. So yeah. I was like finished up at like a couple minutes early today. Who would have thought? Does anyone have any questions? Okay, it's great to see you. I'll see you all on Monday.